My parents taught me to fear home, not the world. How I escaped a childhood full of manipulation, emotional neglect, and constant control that no one outside ever saw. If you were to scroll through my mom's Facebook, you'd swear we were the happiest family in town. Perfectly filtered vacation photos, birthday cakes with icing so smooth it looked fake, pictures of us at school award ceremonies where she always stood just a little too close, smiling like we were best friends. I used to stare at those posts and wonder who that family was, because it sure as hell wasn't mine. People thought I was lucky. Big house in the suburbs. New clothes every school year. My dad worked in finance, made more than enough. My mom stayed home, but only because she thought work was beneath her. I manage this family, she'd say, like we were a corporation. And she really did act like a CEO, demanding, emotionally distant, and only interested in results. Growing up in that house felt like walking on glass barefoot. You never knew what version of them you'd get. Mom could go from smiling to screaming in the time it took to blink. And Dad, he was cold, like painfully cold, not in the quiet, distant way you see in movies. No, my dad had a way of talking that made you feel smaller, with every word. Like you were always a disappointment, even when you did exactly what he asked. They weren't physically abusive, not in the way you'd expect. No bruises, no broken bones. But the emotional stuff? That's harder to explain. You don't get to show people scars when they're inside your head. They never said, "I love you," unless there was an audience. Never hugged me without it being staged. Never asked how I was unless it was to compare me to someone else's kid who was doing better. It was like living in a spotlight you didn't ask for, where everything you did was either not enough or not right. I remember once, in 3rd grade, I had a panic attack before school. Couldn't breathe, couldn't stop crying. My mom told me to stop being dramatic. My dad told me to man up. I was 8. The worst part was, I thought it was normal. I really did. I thought everyone's parents gave them the silent treatment for not folding laundry perfectly, or guilt-tripped them for not smiling in family photos. I didn't realize until much later that love isn't supposed to come with strings. And maybe that's why, even now, I still catch myself apologizing for existing. Still catch myself waiting for someone to explode when I make a mistake. But something happened the year I turned 16. Something small at first. So small it almost didn't register. But it cracked the image I'd spent my whole life pretending was real. It started with a notebook. Just a regular beat-up composition notebook I kept hidden in my closet under a pile of old t-shirts. I'd been writing in it for months, mostly little thoughts, things I couldn't say out loud. Stuff like, "I feel invisible today," or "I wish they'd notice when I'm hurting." One day I came home from school and my mom was sitting on my bed, the notebook open in her lap. She didn't even look mad. She looked smug, like she caught me doing something shameful. "I read what you wrote," she said, flipping a page like she was browsing a magazine. "You're so ungrateful. We give you everything, and this is how you talk about us." I froze. My stomach dropped. It was like someone had turned my skin inside out. I tried to speak, but she cut me off. "You're lucky to live here. Some kids have nothing. You think you have it so bad? Try paying bills. Try raising a child who complains about everything." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that none of this was about money or clothes or food, that what I needed wasn't new sneakers or a clean house. What I needed was a mom who didn't weaponize love. But I didn't say anything, because I'd learned something very early in that house. When you push back, they push harder. That night, my dad came into my room. He didn't ask me how I felt. He didn't even ask why I wrote the things I did. He just stood there in the doorway and said, "Don't embarrass this family again." And then he left. No conversation. No support. Just a command disguised as a warning. That was the moment I realized something that would stay with me for years. They didn't love me. Not really. They loved a version of me that smiled in pictures, got good grades, and stayed quiet when things hurt. They loved the mask I wore. The real me? The kid with messy thoughts and big feelings? They didn't want anything to do with that. I used to think maybe I was too sensitive. That maybe I really did overreact when my dad mocked the way I talked. That maybe I was just dramatic when my mom told me to stop crying again, or called me selfish for not wanting to go to church with them after they screamed at each other all morning. But the truth is, I wasn't too sensitive. I was just a kid trying to make sense of why the people who were supposed to protect me were the ones constantly cutting me open with their words. One night, when I was around 13, I got a stomach ache. It was bad, doubled over kind of bad. I told my mom I needed help, that something felt wrong. You know what she said? You're always looking for attention. Drink some water and go to bed. The next day at school, I passed out during gym. Turns out I had appendicitis. I had to have emergency surgery. My parents didn't even say sorry. Not once. They showed up at the hospital and told me to stop acting like a baby when I cried from the pain. Looking back now, that moment was a turning point. I realized I wasn't safe, not in my body, not in my feelings, and definitely not in my own home. I began shrinking myself to survive. I laughed at their cruel jokes, so I wouldn't cry. I agreed with their opinions, even when they made my stomach twist. I stopped asking for comfort because I learned it would never come. They called me too emotional, too dramatic, too much. But all I ever wanted was to feel seen, heard, loved, not for the version of me they constructed, but for me, the sensitive kid, the kid with needs, the kid who got scared sometimes. They didn't want that kid. They wanted a mirror that only reflected them, and I learned how to become that mirror, at least for a while. On the outside, my parents looked like respectable people, smiled at church, waved to neighbors, paid their taxes. People even said, "You're so lucky to have them." But behind closed doors, they wore different faces. Ugly ones, cold ones, faces that didn't flinch when they hurt me. My mom had this way of crying when anyone confronted her. "I'm doing my best," she'd sob. "No one appreciates me." And just like that, she was the victim. Every single time. My dad, he was more of a stone wall. Silent, distant, but when he cracked, it came out cruel and fast. Words like daggers. Sarcastic. Sharp. "You're pathetic." He'd mutter if I got a B instead of an A. "This is why you'll never be anything." They were never loud enough to draw attention from neighbors. Never violent in ways that left bruises. Just cold, calculated emotional warfare. The kind that doesn't get noticed until it's far too late. I remember one Christmas. I'd saved up allowance to buy them each a little gift. A scarf for Mom, a mug for Dad that said, "World's Coolest." Cheesy. Yeah, but I was 11 and wanted them to smile. They barely looked up when they opened them. My mom said, "Is this all?" My dad chuckled and said, "Try harder next year." Then they moved on. That night, I cried into my pillow until it was soaked. But I told myself they were just tired, or stressed, or maybe I really didn't do enough. I always made excuses for them, because the alternative, believing they just didn't care, was too painful to accept. So I wore a smile in public, said, "I'm fine" when people asked, laughed when they teased me about my parents being strict. If only they knew the truth. If only I had known it sooner. But when you grow up in that kind of environment, it becomes your normal. You don't realize it's toxic until you start choking. And by then, the damage is already done. There was this unspoken law in our house. Whatever I did, it wasn't enough. And the rules? They were never clear. They shifted daily, sometimes hourly. One day, I get punished for not speaking up. The next for talking back. I started second-guessing every word before it left my mouth. Meanwhile, my younger brother could do no wrong. He'd break a glass. "It's okay, honey," accidents happen. I'd forget to take the trash out. Full-blown lecture about how I was ungrateful and lazy. At first, I thought I was imagining the difference, that I was just more sensitive. But no, they really did treat me differently. Like I was the family's punching bag, and my brother was their little golden boy. They made me responsible for everything. Babysitting, chores, keeping secrets, looking presentable. When something went wrong, even if I wasn't involved, it was somehow my fault. Once, my brother skipped school and blamed me for not waking him up. They grounded me. I spent 2 weeks with no phone, no friends, and no TV for something I didn't even do. When I tried to defend myself, my dad's eyes would narrow. Stop making excuses. And if I got too upset, my mom would swoop in with her favorite line. You always play the victim. Grow up. That line still echoes in my head sometimes. Even now, at school I was quiet, overachieving. Teachers loved me. Friends thought I had my life together. No one saw how hard I worked just to earn scraps of affection at home. No one saw how deeply I craved fairness. Not special treatment, just a little consistency. A moment of being seen. A reason to believe I wasn't the problem. But with them, I was always wrong. Even when I wasn't. By the time I hit middle school, I'd gotten really good at hiding how much I was hurting. I wore a mask, a fake smile, a laugh that didn't reach my eyes. Because showing my true feelings at home, that was dangerous. It invited criticism, anger, or worse, complete silence. I learned to bury my sadness deep inside. Cry alone in my room. Write in secret journals. Escape into books and music. Anything that could drown out the noise. I stopped asking for help. I stopped expecting comfort. Even my teachers noticed I was withdrawn, but I told them everything was fine. I lied. So, well, I almost believed it myself. But inside, I was breaking. I wanted to scream. To run away. To be loved for me. Not the perfect kid they wanted. Sometimes, I fantasized about other families. Ones who laugh around dinner tables. Who said, I love you without conditions. Who didn't keep score of every mistake. But those were just dreams. Because my reality was different. And for a long time, I thought I deserved it. I pushed myself harder than anyone else seemed to expect. I took every opportunity seriously, every test, every project, every extracurricular, because I thought maybe, just maybe, if I could be perfect enough, they'd finally see me. They'd finally be proud of me for who I was, not just what I did. But that never happened. Good grades were never met with a simple well done or I'm proud of you. Instead, they were just expected. Like I was some machine built to perform, not a kid who wanted to be recognized. A 4.0 GPA was an accomplishment. It was the bare minimum in their eyes. When I won a science fair in 8th grade, I came home buzzing with excitement, ready to share my victory. My mom barely looked up from her phone and said, "That's nice, honey." My dad muttered, "Don't let it get to your head. You have to keep working." Even when I made the varsity basketball team in high school, a huge deal for me, the reaction was lukewarm at best. Why are you wasting time on sports? My dad asked, you should focus on your studies. No distractions. And then came graduation. That day was supposed to be my proudest moment. I stood on that stage in my cap and gown, heart pounding, knowing I had earned every bit of that honor. But when I walked through the front door, diploma in hand, the house was quiet. No cheers, no hugs, no proud smiles. Just my mom scrolling through her phone, indifferent. My dad reading the newspaper, not looking up. That silence was deafening. It hit me like a ton of bricks. All those years of striving, struggling, hiding my true feelings to be what they wanted me to be. It was never going to be enough. Their love wasn't for me. It was conditional, wrapped up in control, in appearances, in their own fragile pride. For the first time, I asked myself a hard question. Was I doing all this to them, or was I doing it for me? The answer was confusing and painful, because part of me wanted their approval desperately. But another part of me just wanted to be free. I wanted to prove to myself that I was worthy of love. Real love, not just the cold approval they gave. After years of silent suffering and holding everything inside, something inside me finally snapped. I couldn't keep pretending anymore, not to myself, not to them. It started with a small argument over something stupid. I don't even remember what it was exactly. Maybe a missed chore or a bad grade. But this time, instead of swallowing my frustration, I spoke up. I told them how hurt I was, how lonely and scared I felt growing up in their house. I told them I didn't want their approval anymore if it meant losing myself. They didn't take it well. My mom started crying, blaming me for tearing the family apart. Dad just stared at me. his face hard and unreadable. They called me ungrateful, disrespectful, even selfish. But for the first time, I felt a spark of something new inside me, self-respect. That night, I realized standing up to them wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a long, painful battle. After that explosive night, I knew things couldn't keep going the way they had. If I wanted to survive, I had to start protecting myself, mentally, emotionally, and eventually physically. Setting boundaries was new to me. Growing up, boundaries meant punishment or more anger. But I realized they were necessary if I want to keep my sanity. I started small, refusing to engage when they started their blame games, walking away from heated conversations, and saying no to unreasonable demands. It wasn't easy. Sometimes they guilt-tripped me, telling me I was tearing the family apart or that I was being disrespectful. Other times, they ignored my boundaries entirely and tried to push me back into the old dynamic. But every time I held my ground, I felt a little stronger. I began to understand that self-respect wasn't about winning arguments. It was about protecting my peace. And that was something they could never take away. Living in that house was like being trapped in a storm with no shelter. But slowly, I started finding places and people who gave me a little peace. At school, I met a counselor who actually listened without judgment. She helped me put words to the pain I'd bottled up for years. For the first time, I understood that what I was feeling wasn't my fault. I also found friends who saw me, not the perfect kid my parents demanded, but the real me with fears and dreams and messy feelings. It wasn't easy to open up. I was scared of being seen as weak or problematic. But each small conversation, each moment of honesty, chipped away at the loneliness. That support outside my home became my lifeline. It gave me the strength to face my parents, to start setting boundaries, and to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserve better. After years of trying to fix things, hoping they'd change, I finally realized they wouldn't. The house that was supposed to be my safe place was only breaking me down. One night, after a particularly cruel fight where my mom screamed and my dad shut me out completely, something inside me snapped. I packed a bag, not knowing where I'd go, but knowing I had to get away. Leaving wasn't easy. I felt guilty, scared, and alone, but it was the best decision I ever made. Choosing myself over their toxicity was the first step toward healing, and it saved my life. Leaving was just the beginning. The real work started when I had to face the pieces of myself they'd broken over the years. Therapy became a lifeline. For the first time, I learned how to identify toxic patterns, set healthy boundaries, and most importantly, forgive myself for believing their lies. I surrounded myself with people who supported me, friends who didn't judge, mentors who listened, and even family members who finally saw the truth. It wasn't a straight path. There were setbacks, moments when the old doubts crept in, and days when the pain felt unbearable. But slowly I started to rebuild. Piece by piece, I found strength I never knew I had. And for the first time, I began to believe in a future that didn't revolve around their approval. Healing didn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending everything was okay. It meant learning to forgive, not for them, but for myself. I realized holding on to anger kept me chained to the past. Forgiveness was my way of taking back control, breaking the cycle of pain that had haunted our family for generations. It wasn't easy. Some days, the memories felt fresh and raw. I had to remind myself that forgiving didn't mean excusing their behavior. It meant choosing peace over bitterness. I also made a promise, to myself and to the future, that I wouldn't repeat the same mistakes. I would build a life filled with kindness, understanding, and real love. Breaking free from the toxic legacy my parents left was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most freeing. And finally, I was ready to live my own story. After all the fights, tears, and silent nights, I reached a point where I could finally breathe again. My parents never fully changed, and that's okay. I changed. I learned to protect my heart and build walls where there once were wounds. I stopped hoping for their approval and started giving myself the love I'd been missing all those years. It wasn't easy, healing never is, but each day I felt a little stronger, a little freer. I realized that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who stands by you when you choose to live for yourself. I found people who believed in me, who lifted me up, who showed me what unconditional love looks like. I'm still working through the scars, but I'm no longer defined by the past. I'm writing my own story now, one full of hope, strength, and peace. If you're reading this and struggling with toxic parents, know this: you deserve better. You deserve happiness. And it's never too late to find your peace. This journey wasn't easy. It took years of pain, self-doubt, and tough choices. But today I'm free. Free from their expectations, free from the shame, free from the silence. I learned that my worth isn't tied to their approval. It's tied to my own heart, my own kindness, my own courage, my own dreams. I'm still healing, but I'm no longer a prisoner to the past. I'm building a future where love is real, respect is mutual, and my voice matters. If you've lived through toxic parents, know you're not alone. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to choose yourself. And it's okay to create a life filled with joy. Because at the end of the day, your story is yours to write. And you deserve a happy ending.